Great. So my name is Ross Yelsey. I'm an assistant director of admissions and marketing here at Columbia Journalism School. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in this Thursday to learn more about the Master of Science Stabile Investigative Specialization program. And this is a great time of year to do these events for us because, for people who are interested and have questions about it, you can ask them here. But the nice thing is for people thinking of applying the cycle, there's still about 2 months or more left before you need to submit an application. So there's a lot of time to ask questions, learn more about these programs and opportunities, and to chat with our team in the admissions office, as well as hear from our faculty and from our alums too, to get a better sense on what the student experience is like in our different opportunities for graduate study at the school. So today I'd like to welcome Sheila Coronel, the Tony Stabile Professor of Professional Practice in Investigative Journalism and Director of the Stabile Investigative Specialization, and Amanda Gadold, who is a recent graduate, a 2023 graduate of the Stabile program down in sunny Miami. But to begin, I think I'll start with a question for Sheila, which is to tell our group a little bit more about yourself and what drew you to investigative journalism in the first place as a professional journalist.
Hi, everyone. Today, I am Sheila Coronel. I am the director of the program. The program started in 2006. I came to New York from the Philippines, where I ran a nonprofit investigative reporting center, one of the first in the world, actually, one of the first, and certainly the first in Asia. So what drew me to investigative reporting? I always had the sense that important things out of the public eye or the public view, that the in power were hiding information from the public, information that the public needed to know in order to protect their safety, their health, their interests, their money. I had that sense because I grew up in a dictatorship where information was controlled and where the flow of information was really constrained, and the ability of journalists to uncover the truth, to speak truth to power, was very, very diminished. So I was drawn to investigative reporting because I knew there were a lot of things, there were a lot of abuses of power by both public institutions, by private individuals, as well as corporations, that the public needed to know if they were going to make decisions about their future, the future of their country, their own future, and the future of their children.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And so you mentioned also that you came here around, is it 2006? I think that this direct the program. What was the rationale behind creating a specialization specifically in investigative journalism at Columbia, as opposed to continuing to have a broader MS only? Why offer this opportunity to prospective investigative journalists?
Investigative reporters needed a special set that other types of reporters didn't necessarily need or have. We've sort of democratized access to investigative techniques. Every student who goes to Columbia gets a 7-week class on the basics of investigative reporting, but we felt we needed to have a specialist track for those who really want to specialize in investigative reporting, because not everyone wants to do investigative reporting. There's explanatory reporting, there's daily reporting, there's narrative journalism, there's audio storytelling. While you use investigative skills for these types of reporting, you don't necessarily need to do the kind of time-consuming, patient, rigorous, and methodologically sound digging that investigative reporters do, because investigative reporters usually have the luxury of, they spend more time and effort in their reporting. They go beyond the daily grind of news, but they look for documents, interview people, and use other techniques in order to uncover wrongdoing in the public interest.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And Amanda, maybe you can tell our group a bit about your journey to this program. What were you doing before you came to Columbia, and how did you kind of determine that the Stabile Investigative Program was the right fit for what you wanted to do next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I was actually a career changer. I was a high school English teacher for 6 years before embarking on the journalism journey. I was mostly in New York City public schools, and especially during the pandemic, became increasingly frustrated by what I saw as deeply inequitable practices in New York City schools. And I felt particularly frustrated that the Department of Education was covering up some of those inequitable practices. Around the same time, I just started reading a lot more investigative journalism, like Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe, uncovering sort of the major abuses by the Sackler family and the opioid epidemic, and became really excited about applying some of those techniques to public education. As a former teacher, I can't think of an institution that's more important in our society than public education. And I think that parents and students, especially those that have been historically marginalized, deserve to know what's happening behind the scenes in their schools. So I was really drawn to journalism for that reason, holding powerful institutions accountable, a lot like what Sheila said. And I sort of like did investigative reporting to become an investigative reporter. So I just started reaching out to journalists on Twitter who were former teachers, asking them about their experiences in the field. Eventually connected with a Stabile alum who has sort of become a mentor of mine. Had incredible things to say about the program, and I sort of never looked back. I filled out my application, and it was a beyond phenomenal experience.
Great. And Sheila, you touched on this a little bit already in your last answer, but what are some of the kind of key skills, methods, and like goals of what investigative journalists do that maybe differentiates them from other journalists? And Amanda, if you want to chime in as well after Sheila, you're welcome to do that too.
Well, investigative journalists, if you watch the movies, you think investigative reporting is exciting. Actually, a lot of the work that we do is finding and looking for documents, convincing reluctant people to talk to us. And that may mean, Amanda knows this, that may mean talking to dozens, scores, even hundreds of people. That means spending a lot of time and effort. It means providing evidence of wrongdoing. And that evidence can be in documents, it can be what people say, it can be in satellite photos and satellite images, it can be in photographs, it can be in video, it can be in CCTV footage, but trying to be as expansive as possible in finding evidence of wrongdoing and making sure that we get it right. So there's a particular temperament, I think, that distinguishes investigative reporters from other reporters. It's that they are there, they have a long attention span. They are there for a time. They're willing to invest time and effort in uncovering wrongdoing. They're willing to go around obstacles because certainly wrongdoing is wrong, and that's why it's hidden. The good things that people do, they don't usually hide. But it means uncovering, unraveling, and finding sort of the trail of breadcrumbs that show that there was an abuse of power, the abuse of authority, a threat to public safety, harm done to citizens, to individuals, to communities, or even to the planet or to species, right? And to do that means rigorous, painstaking, patient looking at documents, data, and other sources of information. So it's not for everyone. And I don't mean to put down other types of reporting, but it really takes a particular journalist who is interested in investing time, effort, and resource in uncovering wrongdoing so the public may know.
Thanks. Amanda, you have anything to add for that?
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think the first word that comes to mind for me is just relentless, that you need to be relentless. You will hear no over and over and over again, and you need to find other ways in. You need to talk to so many people, convince, like Sheila said, so many unwilling people to speak with you, obviously in ethical ways. And yeah, sometimes the reporting can feel like almost like monotonous, right? Like I spent yesterday watching 24 hours of school board hearings. That was not particularly exciting, but I was looking for this one moment that was really important to show wrongdoing. So I think you also need, like, I think a professor said this, like a low threshold for indignation. You need to be frustrated and upset when harm is done, because if you don't have that passion to drive you, the reporting won't get done and you will get bored very quickly. But yeah, if you do have that low threshold and you do have the drive to do it, it's been incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, thank you. And Sheila, maybe to demystify a bit of what the curriculum looks like for students, the MS Stabile Investigative Specialization is a full-time 2-semester program, fall and spring. How is it designed to help people really gain all of these skills to do the kind of work that you've been discussing?
Yeah, so the program is really correlate. The Stabile program is a specialized track in the general MS program. So Stabile students follow the basic structure of the program that other MS students do. What differentiates the Stabile program is that during the first semester, some students most other students, all the rest of the students, except for the Stabiles, take a 7-week investigative techniques class. For the Stabiles, they take a 14-week class or a 15-week class. They take the entire semester, immersing themselves in investigative techniques and preparing themselves to do an investigative master's project. That means a piece of original reporting that uncovers wrongdoing that has not been published before and that adds something new to what people already know. So it has to be revelatory. And we prepare you in the first semester and you start working your master's project during the fall and continue on to the spring. In the spring, what differentiates the Stabile students is that they take an investigative seminar. They have 2 seminars. You all have 2 seminars in the spring. But one of those seminars have to be an investigative seminar, and we provide a range of investigative seminars depending on the subject matter that you want to specialize in. So, for example, we have investigative seminars on healthcare. We used to have something on mental health. I don't think we're offering that this year. We may do next year. We have investigating conflict, which is taught by our professor Azmat Khan, who won the Pulitzer Prize for her reporting on U.S. drone attacks. A lot of her seminar focuses on using open source intelligence. We have a seminar on telling stories, investigative audio podcasts, which is taught by Joanne Farion, who's an award-winning audio producer. And many of our students take that class because they want to do stories for audio. So the range of these, sorry, I'm losing my voice. We have a range of these seminars that you can choose from, depending on your interest, and they're designed to complement. And there's the investigative project, which is taught by 2 Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists, Walt Bogdanich and Steve Eder. Each year, they work for the New York Times. Each year, they work with their students in a variety of projects, and maybe one of those projects eventually will get published in the New York. So we have this menu of investigative options to choose from. The Stabile students take those classes alongside other MS students. So that's what's different. All the rest is kind of the same. If you look at the school website, you'll find the basic structure of the MS curriculum. What differentiates, just to summarize, what differentiates Stabile is you take a full semester investigative techniques class. You are required to do an investigative master's project. Other students are not required to do that. And you are required to do an investigative seminar along with a continuation of the Stabile seminar that I teach that guides you through the entire arc of doing an investigative report. So in the second semester, we focus not so much on techniques, but looking at the investigative landscape, looking at your careers, looking at how you finish off and market and pitch an investigative report.
Great, thanks, Sheila. And so, Amanda, maybe you can tell our group a bit more about your specific experience in the program. What were some of the highlights of that curriculum in terms of projects or classes that really stood out for you?
Sure. Yeah. So one thing that I want to build off what Sheila was saying was that because your master's project has to be investigative, you then have a master's project advisor who is well-versed in investigative techniques. And that was a really amazing part of the experience for me. I think honestly, the Stabile seminar paired with my master's project was the highlight of the program for me. I would recommend to anyone who ends up in the Stabile program that you start off the year with just a few ideas of topics that you could investigate. I came in, really excited about a range of things that I had seen in the classroom during the pandemic and was able to then kind of hit the ground running on one of those topics. And it was really incredible to have this weekly course that walked me through step by step how to achieve that investigation, and then have an advisor who is, an incredible education reporter, investigative journalist who I could then meet with weekly and sort of pair and augment the class with that one-on-one support. And do you want me to speak at all about non-Stabile courses as well? Is that...
Sure, because the one thing I was going to try to note a little later too, and this is a great time to mention it, is that it doesn't necessarily silo you only in the Stabile program where you're only taking Stabile classes with Stabile students. You have a lot of time with them, of course, but you are able to take classes and get to know the wider kind of MS student community. And you can maybe speak about that. That'd be great.
Absolutely. I mean, first, it was incredible to come into Stabile and have this automatic community of, 12 to 15 other students who you sort of travel with throughout the year. And really investigative reporting is not, in my opinion, sort of this like lone wolf profession. You need to be able to rely on a community around you and, work collaboratively. And so getting to start the year with that group was amazing, but it was also wonderful to get to collaborate with people outside of the Stabile program. First semester, I took an audio class that was really exciting. I'd never done any audio work before. I learned that I don't want to do audio work, but it was still a really positive experience. And then in the spring, I actually took the investigative projects course with Walt and Steve that Sheila mentioned. And because I didn't want to be siloed just into like education reporting, I went out of my way to select a story about healthcare. So with a group of 4 other students, we investigated the accelerated approval process within the FDA. And that was the first time all year that I'd done group reporting. That was a transformative experience to get to have all these different people. I worked with someone in the data program and somebody who focused more on like visual journalism, and to get to bring all of those skills together and explore a topic that I knew nothing about going into it, and to work with 2 of the premier investigative journalists was a really positive experience.
Mm-hmm. Great. And what is it like in a program like all the other programs at the master's level at Columbia? This is a pass-fail program. So what's it like to kind of dive into these classes, but not necessarily have to worry about like letter grades for what you're doing?
I mean, I think it provides a lot of flexibility to experiment, right? It allows you to start pursuing one story and not be terrified, that if you get it wrong or if you have to pivot, you're going to, that you have a grade on the line. But that really, I think it gives you the space to try out different techniques, to try out different storylines, and I think it also just creates a different environment. It means that I noticed that it was a very collaborative program in many ways. I think it gets rid of at least some level of the competition that you might see elsewhere. That being said, the other master's program that I was looking at when I was first applying was a longer program, and Columbia's program is quite short. And so, there is that intensity that comes along with the shorter program. But one thing that I really appreciated about it was that you could just remain hyper-focused on the academics and the reporting while you were there. There wasn't this expectation that you had internships while you were a student, like there might be at other schools. And I think it was actually Sheila who framed it for us as sort of like, you can still picture this as a 1.5-year program where you have 9 months of coursework and then you go off and do a few internships, and that's sort of like a continued education. So I think the entire structure of Columbia's journalism school just worked really well for me. And I liked being able to hyper-focus on the coursework and then shift over to the workforce.
Mm-hmm. Great. And it's going back to the Stabile group. I know like most Wednesday nights when I'm kind of leaving my office around like 5-ish, I see the Stabile students usually coming together to do the Stabile seminar each week on Wednesdays. What is that experience like? Or what kind of things do you take away from that particular class specifically for the Stabile group?
Sure. So Sheila teaches that course along with 2 TAs. I believe they're the same TAs this year, who are former Stabile students, and then Jim Mintz. And so, I mean, as a former teacher, one thing I really appreciated about the course was how clear, we called it a scope and sequence when I was teaching, just sort of like how clearly the class is structured and laid out to ramp up to a master's project. It can sound really intimidating to write a multi-1,000-word investigation over the course of 6 to 9 months. But the way that Sheila lays out the class, it means that you start off with like really the building blocks of investigation. I think, the first few weeks we just talked about what is an investigative story, what differentiates it from other types of stories, and how do you find an investigation? How do you do a clip search to make sure that that investigation hasn't already been done? Because there is nothing worse than getting really in the weeds of something only to open up Google and realize somebody else published it 3 weeks before. So starting from those small building blocks and then eventually ramping up to how do you craft a narrative was, I think, one thing that I really took away from that class. Mm-hmm. Also, just how discussion oriented it was. It's not what you would imagine is like a lecture-based class. It really is a lot of reading, coming together, discussing, processing, looking at models of really strong investigations, figuring out how you can incorporate some of those techniques into your own work as well.
Great. And we've been talking about the master's project throughout this conversation. Sheila, would you tell our group a bit about some of the subject matter that some students have maybe addressed through their investigative reporting for that project, kind of some themes or things people have been able to delve into?
Well, we give students a lot of freedom to choose the topics that they would like to investigate. You know, this is a 6 month. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Mm-hmm.
You have to really be passionate about the subject that you want to investigate. Amanda was passionate for education at the very beginning and was really determined to do something about New York City public school education. And she was great, you know, because she hit the ground running. But others, you know, they have many interests. You know, we've done investigations in healthcare. That on each year, we also try to have a topic that people can work around. Those who want to work in teams, but each member of the team doing their own master's project. So last year we had a team of 3 students working on heat stress, you know, and how increasing levels of heat are making it dangerous for workers, especially for outdoor workers. So we had students who traveled to Florida and Arizona to look at the impact of heat stress on their health. Mm-hmm. And look at cases of workers dying because of extreme temperature. So some of our students travel to do their work. One of our students' work just got published this week in the New York Times. That's Sarah Cutler. She wrote a story about immigrants who are being detained, not for crimes, but because they are material witnesses in human smuggling cases. And so courts detained them for several months, sometimes 6 months, indefinitely, so that they could be material witnesses. And no one has uncovered this before. And Sarah was a former defense analyst, but she was scouting around. You know, she had many possible stories that she wanted to look at. She was specializing in the Middle East, and she wanted to look for a story related to the Middle East. But then she started talking to people. This is what we let you do very early on. Talk to people and ask them what interesting things they are seeing and what's bothering them and what they think journalists are not covering enough. And in one of those conversations, Sarah talked to an immigration lawyer who said, I have a client who's, I'm sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a client who's been detained for no reason except that she was supposed to be a witness in a case. And so Sarah did what a lot of investigators do, which is how often does it happen? So she did public records requests, she got data, and eventually worked with her master's project advisor to publish the story that's like at the top of the news site of the Times yesterday. So it can be, you can come to the program with an idea on a topic that you're passionate about, or you can come to the program with some idea and then decide there are other things worth exploring. So some of our students have also done international investigations. The beauty of the Stabile program is that we provide funding for research, for travel, for doing document requests, for photocopying, and other things that you may need in the course of your investigation.
Great. And
so we provide not just mentoring support, but also financial support so that you can do your investigation.
Great. And Amanda, Sheila mentioned you hit the ground running with your master's project. Can you tell the group a bit more about your experience developing that?
Sure. So yeah, in some ways I did hit the ground running. I had an idea when I came in that I had started off my career in charter schools, and was really interested in sort of like the credit recovery that I saw happening in charter schools, these sort of like under the table deals that were happening where students were not passing classes. And then a week before the end of a semester, they'd be handed a packet of work and suddenly they'd be passing. And these were typically students who had been historically marginalized, students in neighborhoods with lower SES backgrounds, students of color, who, you know, had been left behind by their educational experiences for so many years and then were just continually being passed along. And so I came in wanting to write about that, and both my advisor and Sheila helped me to realize that that was more of a topic than it was a story. And that's something that we talk a lot about, is that you need to go as narrow as possible. So writing about credit recovery in New York City is a massive topic that is not likely going to be a successful undertaking in 6 months. So I ended up narrowing in on a specific credit recovery policy that was in New York City schools during the pandemic, that essentially allowed thousands of students to be passed on to the next grade level without ever attending classes or turning in work. And the empirical spine of it ended up being a records request that I very luckily got back in sort of the final hour, that other journalists had not reported on. And I was able to show just how widespread this was. It was wider spread than I even realized, how many students were impacted by this policy. And I ended up being able to demonstrate that it inflated it shadily inflated graduation rates across New York City, while those graduation rates were falling nationally. I think probably the most challenging part of the investigation was speaking with teachers and students. For anyone who knows a teacher, they're often very scared to speak to the media. Their jobs can be at risk. So it took a lot of sort of shoe leather reporting. I ended up trying to survey hundreds of teachers across the city. I ended up speaking with 25 of them, just to demonstrate this sort of like pattern of unethical behavior from the top down.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I think a story related to that was published in Chalkbeat, if I'm not mistaken. So you can see that in the link here in the chat if you'd like to read it. Mm-hmm. Great. And so, Sheila, what can we say about kind of the career paths of Stabile graduates over the years? What kind of places have they been working at? What kind of work have they been doing since finishing the program?
So our graduates do a range of things. Our graduates who stay in the US, they work initially for newspapers or for nonprofit investigative reporting centers. There's a whole lot of them now. There are like over 100 nonprofit investigative reporting groups all around the country. Some of them work for the big ones, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, NBC News, ProPublica. I consider that big, even if it's a nonprofit. And many for metro papers like the Baltimore Sun, the Tampa Bay Times, all of that. So this whole range. A lot of them also end up in broadcast. We have a couple of students in 60 Minutes in NBC and in local broadcasting stations. There are a few who end up in public radio. Not many, but several of them, or quite a number of them, go on overseas to work as correspondents for big wire agencies like Reuters or the AP, or they work for the BBC, or go back to their home countries. Whether it's in Europe, I just met with a student who's now working in Ireland for the first nonprofit investigative reporting center there. We have a student who runs the investigative team at public television in Berlin, in Germany. So those of them who opt to go back find that their training is really helpful. And even those who stay here in the US find that the training they have in investigative techniques gives them a leg up, whether they end up in specialized investigative teams or investigative centers, or they're doing beat reporting for news organizations.
Thanks. And Amanda, it's been about, I guess, 5 months since the program ended for you. What have you been doing work-wise since graduating, and what skills so far have been really helpful that you developed at Columbia in what you've been doing?
Sure. So I think, as you mentioned at the beginning, I am zooming in from Miami right now. So I am interning at the Miami Herald on their education desk as a beat reporter. But I think one thing that Stabile sort of like armed me with this mindset that even beat reporting should be investigative. And so it allows me to go into even daily news stories and try to find some sort of investigative angle to dig a little bit deeper than the surface, which, when reporting on education in Florida right now, I think is a really important skill. This summer, before coming down to Miami, I was at a small local nonprofit newsroom in Maine called the Maine Monitor. One thing that is amazing about Columbia is they do CJI and CJS fellowships. So essentially you get paired with a small newsroom and Columbia pays your salary, but you get to work with these like really incredible nonprofit newsrooms. So I was there in Maine working with the editor of the Maine Monitor, was actually the former front page editor at the Boston Globe for over 20 years. So he was incredible and I learned a great deal. And then I leave Miami in November and will be starting a full-time role as an investigative journalist at an education nonprofit newsroom in January.
Oh, that's great. And a question for Sheila. Sheila, you mentioned before that students in our broader MS program will get the chance to take an investigative skills class in the fall, no matter kind of what they end up deciding to do. And they can take some of these investigative classes in the spring if they want to focus and get better skills in that area. How should someone maybe who's thinking about applying to Columbia think about, should I do the Stabile Investigative Specialization is what I'm applying for, or the broader MS in terms of like, what kind of questions should they ask themselves about whether this would be the right fit, as opposed to getting some investigative training in the broader MS?
Before I answer that question, Amanda, I don't know if you know, we have this loan forgiveness program. For those who work in nonprofit newsrooms, the journalism school is providing up to $50,000 in support for those who decide to work in local nonprofit newsrooms after graduation. So it's like our way of helping our students, but also our way of helping keep the information landscape diverse and focus on really good journalism. So to your question, if you think that you have the passion for digging, for long-term, patient, persistent, dogged digging into documents, data, and getting people to talk to you and finding wrongdoing, then the investigative program is for you. If you have a broader range of interests and not sure what you want to do, or you are more focused on doing narrative journalism, for example, then maybe you should go for the general program, because that gives you more flexibility and allows you more immersion in a particular genre or type of reporting that you want to do. But investigative skills are applicable across a wide variety of beats. Amanda is doing education. We've had students who ended up working in sports investigations, very, very important, or doing business reporting, but using the investigative techniques, or doing political reporting or international reporting using the investigative techniques that they've learned. So it's really, we're focused on the digging techniques. And if that's the kind of journalism you want to do, rather than, quick turnaround stories, you can do that too, of course. But if then the investigative program is for you.
Great. And just following up on that for both Sheila and Amanda, any advice in terms of what kind of mindset should people bring into this program to do well? I know it involves sometimes spending a lot of meticulous time looking over documents, sometimes finding things that, aren't actually that helpful for what you're wanting to do, but spending a lot of time getting to those like pieces of information, even if they don't add up to what you want them to. So that kind of patience. But what kind of motivations will help you, succeed if you're going to get into this line of journalism?
I mean, yeah, I think just like we've said, like voracious, nonstop digging, leaving not a single stone unturned. Whenever I think about it as sort of like the spidey sense you get when you hear someone say something, and you're like, okay, I could either let that go or I could dig into that point. And sometimes it takes a few extra days, and sometimes it leads to a dead end, but sometimes it then leads you to this new gem in a story. That is this whole new level of wrongdoing that you hadn't even anticipated going into it. So I think it takes a lot of patience. It takes a desire to keep digging and to uncover every stone. And then I think, one thing that I hadn't thought enough about, I think going into journalism, I think I thought a lot about the reporting process, talking to people, getting quotes, getting people to go on the record, and had honestly, transparently thought less about the writing side of it, and how challenging it is to take sometimes for my thesis, like hundreds of pages of notes and distill it into a narrative that people will read, because your reporting doesn't matter if you can't get people to read it. And so that's this like sort of other side of the puzzle that is overwhelming and hard, but also deeply satisfying and fun. So I think you need to have the ability to take large quantities of information and distill it down. I think it was Sheila, maybe it was one of the TAs who would often talk about like basically like tricking people into eating their vegetables. So, you need to take your investigation and package it in a way that people are excited to consume.
Great, that's great advice. So now is the time for any of our attendees who have questions to pose them. The way to do that is to put questions in the chat over here on Zoom. You can direct them to me, Ross, the host, and I will try to ask as many that are pertinent to the conversation today about the Stabile program to Sheila and Amanda. So please feel welcome to put those in starting now. I took a couple from our previous kind of registration questionnaire, and some people had some questions about the difference between the data program, the MS in data journalism, and the investigative program. For people who might be interested in kind of both in doing investigative work, but using maybe data as a key source, how might they think about determining whether this program or maybe the data MS would be a good fit for what they want to do?
So the data MS is a rigorous program that really focuses on data and computational skills. The Stabile program focuses on investigative skills. We do have a data element. We do basic data for all the Stabiles. And while you are in the J school, you can opt to take an extra class in data, or you can even take a data seminar in the spring if you wanted bigger immersion in data. So it really depends on what balance you want. If you want more data, and the whole spread of data, including visualizing information, you go for the data program. If you want more investigative skills and you really want to focus on the digging with data as an element of the digging process, then you should go for Stabile.
Mm-hmm.
And can I just add one thing to that? That there are often sort of like weekly seminars and like the student center that you can attend to sort of supplement. So I know there were a number of Stabile students who were really interested in learning how to visualize data, and they would either go to those sessions or seek out professors who specialized in that. I, at least in my experience at Columbia, found professors to be incredibly welcoming to students that they didn't necessarily teach. So let's say you're really interested in audio, you could go to Joanne Ferrion's office hours and talk to her about how to turn your master's project into a piece of audio work. In the same way, you could go to a data professor and ask them for assistance. So there are ways to supplement with data, even if that's not your focus.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very good point. We do have the Tao Center and the Brown Institute, which right now, for example, they're running a mapping workshop and it's open to everyone. And then they have regular programs. Right now, they have a lot of programs on AI, and they're holding office hours and using artificial intelligence for it. And that's available to anyone. You don't have to be in a data class to avail yourself of.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. Here's a question we get a lot for all of our programs. I'll probably pose this to Amanda since you just recently finished the program, but how would you describe a day in the life of a journalism school student here in terms of that? I always find that tricky because I think it changes day to day as part of it, right? Could you maybe help illuminate a bit about what that's like to be here?
Sure. I mean, I think part of it is that it's extremely different for every single student at the journalism school, right? So there are a lot of students who have long commutes, or perhaps it's not encouraged, but there are students who do need to work jobs in order to support themselves during school. And so, you know, it depends on your life circumstances. One thing that did impact, so I live in Brooklyn full time. And so I had an hour and 10-minute commute each way. So that meant that I wasn't on campus 5 days a week. I was on campus, I believe, 4 days a week. And I think I had classes 4 days a week for both semesters. So a lot of the day would sort of look like a 3-hour block of class, and then free time on either end of it. And the way that I structured it, each class meets once a week. And so the way that I would structure it for myself is I would say, let's say I had my Stabile class on Wednesday night, then Thursday, I would dedicate the full day to doing all of the work for my Stabile class. One thing that can be challenging about J School is that you're balancing 3 to 4 different stories at the same time. And I know that, at least for me, I needed to take a full day to sort of surround myself with a single story. So like Mondays would be my investigative projects day, where I would only focus on that story. Tuesdays would be my Dale Maharj class day, where I would only focus on a narrative story. And for me, that structure worked really well and helped it to feel a little bit less overwhelming. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that was great. A question more for Sheila, I think, on the admissions side. People are asking kind of what might make a strong Stabile application. What kind of things will maybe an admissions committee be looking for in a Stabile app to kind of indicate this person would be potentially well suited for this curriculum?
So we are very democratic in our approach. You know, we don't need to have had previous journalism experience to apply for this video program, as Amanda showed you. But what we look for are people who are really have the what we think have the personality and the temperament to be able to do patient digging over a long period of time. We want a commitment, a long-term commitment to investigative reporting, to journalism as a career, a belief in the mission of journalism as watchdog of society, but somehow you can have that sense in your essays. And also a willingness to learn, because investigative journalism, each time you dig into something, you are constantly learning something new and immersing yourself on a topic, on a subject, on an institution.
Mhm. Thank you. Oh, and so a question too about kind of this beyond the classwork, what kind of opportunities are there to kind of network and meet leading journalists in the investigative realm or other areas of the profession? I know there's plenty of events day to day. As I look at the elevator well here in Pulitzer Hall, there's always about 4 or 5 things going on a day, it seems like. But maybe Amanda or Sheila, you could speak to the general kind of life that goes on in this building during the academic year.
Yeah, so there are so many events. It's really like the other day we had Marty Baron over at the J School. Next week we're going to have Malaki Brown, who's the head of the Visual Investigations Unit at the New York Times. If you haven't heard about visual investigations, you should look it up. This is using visual data, satellite images, video footage, photographs, etc., to find the truth behind events. In the Stabile program, we regularly bring investigative reporters over to talk to students, but also we bring our alumni and help you connect with our alumni who are doing amazing investigative work in many different types of media organizations around the country. And what we really want to do is to build a Stabile community. We have over 200 Stabile graduates now, and they really help each other, find jobs, exchange information, and be just a support network, because this industry can be really challenging. But having that supportive community is very important. I mean, beyond what you learn in the classroom, having that community is throughout your career is a really important thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think also just like a willingness to put yourself out there. So one thing that I tried to do in my first few months, I did 2 things. One is you can go to the library, the journalism school library, and read previous students' master's projects. So my first few weeks in journalism school, I spent a lot of time in the library reading those master's projects. And I actually reached out to a few people whose projects, I really enjoyed, to ask them about their reporting process. And I also try to do that with investigations that are published nationally. I'll reach out to a journalist if I think that I more so do this. I did it with Eliza Shapiro, for example, when she published her investigation on yeshivas in Brooklyn. So if there's, I think any opportunity can become a networking opportunity if you make it one. And I have found that for the most part, people are really willing and excited to speak to new journalists in the field.
Great. And a question maybe for Sheila. Someone's wondering, an international potential applicant, wondering if it can be more challenging for international students to find stories to do for their master's project, if maybe they're less familiar with issues maybe in this particular area of New York or in the US?
It can be, but we find that our international students have really done very well. In your reporting class, you get immersed in New York City and generally the US and New York City government. So you get a little bit of that background already early on in the semester. Many international students build off their reporting in their reporting class, but some of them also try to do international stories or stories related to the communities that they're most familiar with. So for example, with a Chinese student, right after Hurricane Ida, who looked at the houses in Chinatown in Flushing that had been flooded, and the fate of the families who had been displaced for their homes, and the paucity of government support for them because they didn't have the right language. They didn't have, many of them were undocumented immigrants. So she used her Chinese language abilities and her familiarity with Chinese culture to be able to do a project that's right here in New York City.
I just put in the chat an example of a master's project that was published, I think 2 weeks ago, not by Stabile students, but it was an investigation. And it was, one student was from Copenhagen, the other was from South Korea, and they paired up and worked together on a master's project that was looking at sort of transracial adoption between the two countries and these really problematic practices within it. And one of my favorite things about their project was that when they went home over winter break, one of them was able to report from home in South Korea. One of them was able to report from home in Copenhagen. And they were both able to really use their international status as an asset to go through, you know, documents at home, to speak to people at home. And the resulting story was incredible.
Thank you for sharing that. Another question about...
I mean, let me also share that we had an Iranian student who couldn't go back to Iran, obviously, but did an amazing project using social media, using public records from the Iranian government. You'd be surprised, a lot of Iranian public records are online, and doing a lot of phone calls from right here in New York. And her story was also published in The Guardian. It's about how during the sanctions, when there was a shortage of US dollars to buy goods from overseas, a lot of rich Iranians were getting the dollar allocations to buy Lamborghinis and fancy cars while depriving needy Iranians of medicine that they need. So she did all of that from New York. And the story was published in The Guardian.
Oh, wow. Great. And a final question, I think, since we're getting towards the end of the hour, about ethics and training in ethics. I know that's a big question for all journalists, you know, ethical questions. I know all Master of Science students will take an ethics class in the fall semester. Maybe Amanda, you could tell us a bit about that class, and then how Stabile teaches people about, you know, ethical kind of guidelines in doing investigative work specifically.
Yeah, so there is a specific ethics class. I took it with Steve Adler, who was incredible, where I think it was maybe a 6-week module where you go through different scenarios. One that really stuck with me was, you know, he would show us photos that included children's faces in really challenging situations. And we would have conversations about what your ethical obligation is to show wrongdoing versus to protect children who maybe aren't old enough to consent. So yeah, those conversations were incredibly helpful. I think about them all the time as I'm reporting now. But conversations about ethics were also woven into every class that I took at Columbia. It wasn't specific just to the ethics course. So we talked about ethics nonstop in our Stabile class, especially. You know, often investigations deal with vulnerable populations who maybe don't have a lot of experience working with journalists before, who don't have a lot of media literacy. So we have a lot of conversations about how you interview different people differently. There's trauma-informed reporting, but there's also this idea that, you know, if you're talking to a spokesperson for a company and they say something and then try to take it back and take it off the record, you know, that's very different than if you're talking to a child about their experience in a school and they say something and then ask you to not print it. So conversations about how power works in these, you know, in these situations and what our obligations are.
Great, thank you. So I think as we are getting towards the end of the hour, we can we'll leave the chat at that. Thank you for your great questions from the audience. And I'd like to thank Professor Sheila Coronel and Amanda for joining us today to offer all these insights into the Stabile program. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, there's a lot of time still to think about, you know, your application. If you're thinking of applying this year, to ask us questions in the admissions office. So I'll put our Meet With Us link here too. So you're welcome, you know, if you have other questions about the application process, about educational financing, to reach out to us. We'll have drop-in office hours and some upcoming virtual events to give you better understanding of the application and the application for scholarship here at the school. So plenty of time to chat, plenty of time to ask questions and learn more about the opportunities here. Thanks again to everyone for coming. We look forward to keeping in touch online, on email, wherever it might make sense for you. And I wish you all to have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye now.
Thank you.